Welcome to the DRPG tent talk around rethinking live experiences and what I hope is going to be a bit of a practical guide. I'm Matt Franks, Director of Events here at DRPG, and today I want to just take you on a journey of how we need to start thinking about events and experiences as we move forward. So it's been a long time since we've seen any activity like this, and I think it's likely to be a little while longer. Certainly we've turned our hands to virtual. I think the world of virtual experiences is phenomenal. It provides us with an amazing platform and gives us lots of scope to engage with our audiences in lots of different ways, whether that's just a simple broadcast like we're having now, or whether we create a more immersive virtual environment right through to a virtual world. It's a really competitive environment. It's so difficult to cut through noise of content, and we're all surrounded by so much choice of content. Think about Netflix. On demand at the press of a button, we can engage with anything we choose. So we've had to quickly go on a fast journey, and I think everybody in this industry, whether it's events, communications, experiences, had to adapt and evolve. And we've had to think about how we can translate virtual into providing accessible, easy to reach and on-demand experiences. It will play a part in our future and it will continue to evolve. So we'll see a shift to hybrid, and we're working through what does that look like at the moment. And there are so many things to consider around that. So if you think about hybrid experience, I think it has so much potential to widen your audience and widen the reach, but at the same time, you can ostracize those people that are on the virtual experience versus those that are there in real person. So there's a real balance to be had as we start to design that. From January onwards, I think we'll start to see the return of events, but it will be a blend of virtual and live, and hence the hybrid. And the return will probably start to see some road shows, hubs, touring experiences, and probably some smaller gatherings as well. All of our journey in the next 12 to 18 months, I think, is going to be supplemented by virtual, and we can embrace that. Don't underestimate the power and need and desire for live events and human interaction. Events have the power to do things that digital experiences don't. They create an opportunity for people to have an experience that's meaningful, memorable, adds value because they are physically there experiencing it and they're connected to it. So it's so important that we get back to that. And I think we have to be very considered about how we're going to do it. And for me personally, I think we have to face into challenges. And if there's one thing that this industry gives us, is the confidence to face into challenges and to achieve things that we never thought were possible. Personally, for me, I used to be overweight, as some teenagers are, but I had never dreamed that I would be able to run or take part in a marathon. And doing events taught me that you can achieve pretty much anything, and anything really is possible. And I embarked on that, and I harnessed the energy from live events and the ability to have that can-do attitude to run a marathon. So if there's any group of people that can hit this head on and deal with these challenges, I believe it's the people that work in this industry. We need to embrace the things that we've learned from the virtual that we've just gone through in the last 6 months, and possibly even longer than that, merge those with the real world experiences, and that will give us a great output. So it's going to be a volatile journey as we move forward. There'll be progress and there'll be setbacks. The big thing we need to concentrate on, though, is the priority of safety. So it's making sure our delegates feel safe in a live environment or an experience. And so when they come and interact with something, it's making sure that they feel everything has been thought through and this is the right place to be. If we think back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you can see here, this is about making sure that we meet the foundations. So take the basic principles. Having our physical needs met and being safe are the foundations of what enable us to move forward and engage with everything else. So you need to do that before we can pay attention to anything else that's here. It's often referred to as a deficiency. So meeting the basic needs, which are the two bottom ones here, isn't a direct positive experience, but failing to do so will create a negative and will mean nobody engages with anything else. So therefore, for me, the priority as we move forward with events and experiences is making sure that we focus on the safety needs of individuals. And we're doing that through 4 key elements that we believe address those needs. And we've put them into 4 areas because we believe each one underpins the key principles. So we've got social distancing, and we've got cleaning and hygiene, we've got communication, and protect and detect. And what we'll do is take you on a journey to go through each of those in a little bit more detail. We've developed a secure standard approach in line with associations and government guidance, and we're now going to take you through each of those and offer some practical tips. So I'm joined now by Alan Law, who's a leading health and safety specialist in our industry, and Amy Dean, who's our head of project management here at DRPG. What we'd like to do now is talk you through the pillars in a bit more detail, giving some practical top tips that you can take away and use as you think about the return for live events. So let's get started with the first one, which is social distancing. I think we've all now experienced social distancing in some way, shape or form, whether that be in a supermarket or when you're out and about in a park somewhere. And the rules are changing all the time, but certainly for events, we need to be very considerate at how we enforce that. And that can be done through your event formats, such as staggering your sessions or having longer durations for your event, or indeed thinking about roadshows or your approach, whether it's virtual or hybrid. So there's lots of things we can be doing, but I guess, Alan, what are the big things we should be considering around social distancing at the moment?
Well, Matt, I think it's important to remember within the event sector that we're already experts in social distancing, although we didn't call it social distancing a year ago. We often looked at the fire regulations, it gave us occupancy capacities, fire exit capacities, gave us sort of highlighted pinch points. So we are quite versed in that sort of calculation. So basically, we're just applying the same methodology that we've always done, because in many cases we have a situation where we can get, say, 100 people in the room, but we choose not to because of the delegate experience.
Yeah.
And we're applying that same, as I say, methodology to social distancing. So it's not as daunting as it may first seem.
No. And in terms of thinking about the operational plans, what kind of things should we be considering? Do we have to consider just the event day? Do we need to consider everything beyond that?
Well, now we have to consider everything, from the build and the breakdown, going forward into the live event and at the pre-production level.
Yeah.
We need to be considering particularly social distancing at every level.
Yeah.
So yes, we need to consider all elements of the event delivery.
And should we be thinking about the routes for people and marking out different routes on different days?
Absolutely. I think the starting point is always to talk with the venue first,
Yeah.
because many venues have thought this out very well. I was at the London Palladium earlier this week, and they had some great protocols in place.
Yeah.
Very straightforward, not difficult to adhere to. Other venues you go to may not have anything. I'm thinking, say, hotel conference rooms, where they aren't as au fait or,
Yeah.
dare I say, pay quite as much attention as the large venues have. So I think that's your starting point, and then you develop from there.
Yeah.
And I'd always recommend you start with what the venue has to offer, or any work they've already done.
Yeah.
With one-way routes, social distancing, any signage they've got in place, and then you do the assessment and see what else you need to add to it.
Yes. Yeah. So maybe from a delegate perspective, what should we be thinking about as we're planning the journey?
Yeah, so we need to make sure that we step through that delegate journey, and we've covered every touch point that a delegate could take, and that's really with safety as our only consideration. And we need to do that right from the delegate arrival and registration. But with the advancement in mobile and digital technologies, digital credentials mean that we can really eliminate the use of physical badges, lanyards, wristbands, those sorts of things. But that really also helps us speed through that arrival and registration process. And we can also look at aiding that with multiple entrance points and also staggered admission times. But we also need to look, as Alan said, at that delegate flow, and we need to make sure that one-way visitor flow throughout the venue is logical, and elements such as toilets, we really need to review that on a case-by-case basis with the venues to make sure that is all aided throughout that flow that we've planned. But also food and beverage, that's a huge part of any event, and we need to make sure that that's landed in the right way. And we can look at all sorts of options in terms of how that food and beverage is served. So, for example, pre-packaged or contained options, things like pies in a box are a great example how minimal contact can be given to serving that food, but also in a real quick-paced way so that delegates aren't then queuing for long periods of time in confined spaces. So there's all those kind of considerations that we can take, and you look at tea and coffee stations, again, reducing masses of people in one space, but also contact. So whether you have venue staff that are pouring your tea, coffee and milk into a personal tea or coffee cup that they own themselves, it's all about reducing that physical contact. So we can absolutely look at all those elements on an individual basis, and that's really, as event managers, what we need to be doing.
So I guess the key thing is there, it's making sure as you go through that journey, it's eliminating multiple touch points of any items. And I think we talked about food and beverage as being one of the key things, that you can give coffee cups to people so they pick them up on arrival, and water bottles. And I guess the big thing is reducing plastic, isn't it? To make sure, not just from a COVID point of view, but also from a sustainability point of view as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we see many clients doing that now. We often encourage delegates to bring their own water bottles with them and use water stations. So there's also always been an element of that there over the past couple of years, but that's something that we really now need to be emphasising and encouraging.
So just summary on the social distancing, really it's about thinking through that format, that delegate journey, the touch points, and the behaviours of the people as we go, as our delegates, as we go on that journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, I think that, bearing in mind, we want to give the delegate the best experience we can, as we always have done.
Yeah.
And we don't want to make the controls too prohibitive or too difficult.
Yeah, it needs to feel normal and a nice environment. Absolutely. And I think we come on to that. So one of the things that's huge out there at the moment is really cleaning and hygiene. And, I think we now have this all new heightened awareness. The amount of times I sing happy birthday in a day whilst washing your hands now, I'm sure we're all familiar with that. But we see hand sanitising stations everywhere, and that's not a bad thing. But I guess we have to think carefully about how we deploy that in a live event environment. So, Alan, what kind of considerations should we be making around, the cleaning and hygiene as we plan our event?
Well, I think once again, start off with your venue, find out what they've got in place. I think historically in events, we've always expected the cleaning team to be back of house.
Yeah.
Out of sight, out of mind and all that. I think it's a very different world we live in now. Very important for the confidence of the delegates to have a visible cleaning presence. Cleaning teams with it clearly written on their T-shirts, cleaning team, visibly cleaning multi-touch points. That's very reassuring.
Yeah.
I think we've all experienced that in restaurants and pubs in recent months. So once again, it inspires confidence. I think as far as sanitization, we need to be mindful that there's no substitute to hot water and soap. So we wouldn't want to be putting sanitizers in toilets, but we put them in areas strategically placed around the venue where people may not be close to a toilet or may not have time to get back to a toilet, so they can sanitize if they've accidentally touched something that they weren't comfortable with. That's a sort of consideration. And make them very clearly and very obvious, in obvious places, and ideally above them, a bit of signage in case, so people,
and almost
quite small stations.
And almost contactless ones as well. So there's, we eliminate touch again. Absolutely. At that point. And I think you mentioned, one of the best things we can do is almost give everybody hand sanitizer as a,
Well, we discussed this earlier on, where you could send out a sort of a pack to your delegate, which would contain maybe a hand sanitizer, a pack of alcohol wipes, maybe a face visor for people that are clinically vulnerable. We're talking about badges to acknowledge that they may have, they may be clinically vulnerable, and the collapsible recyclable cup. They could, or water bottle, which they could travel through the entire event and take home with them as a souvenir, if you will. And this could be branded, so it would be a memento of the event.
And that all supports cleaning and hygiene because it's yours. And the whole principle here that we need to be thinking about is eliminating multiple touch points. So you get one thing and it's yours, and then you take that on the journey with you. And these are all the key things as we went on to earlier. This is all about giving everybody confidence, and the biggest part of that, in our opinion, is communication. So I think when you think about building trust and confidence, it's because you've been giving all the information. Not knowing creates bigger issues because you then start to overthink things. So from the outset, our approach and our recommendation is start thinking about how you're going to tell that story. How are you going to communicate with everybody? How are you going to make sure that they feel confident? So build a very strong communications plan that tells that story as a delegate goes on the journey. So Amy, what should we be considering as part of the communication planning process?
Yeah, so all four pillars can be communicated in any form, but what that communication contains should be updates from any global and local health authorities, things like arrival procedures or hygiene measures or health protection measures that we've looked at and implemented. But the communication should really preempt delegates on what they should expect on the day, and how that lands and how that looks should be quite visual and friendly. So, for example, through the use of animation, infographics, even things like venue maps to preempt what that one-way visitor flow might be through the venue. And it should start right from the pre-event registration process and filter throughout the whole comms campaign leading up to the event. And on site, signage becomes more crucial than ever. It's really important to aid that delegate flow, to help aid those catering arrangements and any other measures that we've put in place. And as event managers, it's really imperative that we walk through that plan and put together a comprehensive signage plan to make sure that there is no room for interpretation. And things like live announcements. So this is again where it can really aid that delegate management on site, and we can use that as an opportunity to provide a bit of familiarity and a bit of warmth, but it also needs to be very clear and simple, and even adding a bit of humour, just to lighten up the situation that we find ourselves in. So there's a lot of elements that we can look at, but I think it's really imperative that we test that communication. So we need to do a bit of work pre-event, and it needs to be simple. So whether we use the form of emojis just to preempt how that might land to your mass audience, is quite imperative really to make sure that we do hit the nail on the head. But it's also in terms of having someone visible there, someone that can provide reassurance and answer those questions to any delegates that might need that. That can look like a help desk on site, or it could be a pre-event hotline facility or instant message chat. But it is really important to have that visibility to help provide that reassurance to delegates.
Just someone that you can ask a question
of. Course, yeah.
I think with the communication then, so really it's about keeping it really clear and concise and providing all the detail, but in a very visual way, and make sure obviously signage has got to be simple anyway in this kind of environment, and try it out with other audiences. Do they get confidence from the information you're providing? And that's key to it, because actually this is probably the biggest part to building that confidence and trust. And then we hear about protect and detect an awful lot. So this is the last pillar for us. And ultimately, there's lots of guidance around it. We hear one day do this, we hear another day do this. And from an event perspective, we need to have a very clear message and make sure we're communicating that. So Alan, what really should we be considering around protect and detect?
There's a number of things I think we need to consider. I think, just to agree with your point, there's some very confusing government guidance and some contradictory guidance, and it's not surprising that our delegates will be confused. So it's very important that we have a very clear, solid message to them that's simple and they understand and they feel comfortable with. Some of the measures we may put in place may not be necessary as far as the guidance is concerned, but we feel from a confidence level it's worth considering. Certainly we need to think about the the pre-event stage, pre-registration, staggering arrivals, as Amy mentioned. Doing as much as we can with the contactless technology that we have. We discuss often using an event app, which you could do an awful lot through and with, particularly with on the registration basis. We have a COVID self-declaration questionnaire that they complete 7 days out, and we get confirmation as they arrive at the venue. The information entered is nothing's changed. We need to keep it as simple as possible, and ideally working through a person's smartphone, their own device. So once again, we reduce the chance of this sort of transmission through multi-contact.
And that's coming into its own really as part of a communication tool. And what about the testing and monitoring system? So it's one thing declaring it and filling that out as part of your registration, but then when you come to the event, there's lots of tools at our disposal now. So what kind of things can we consider using?
All sorts of things, really. The technology of surrounding sort of UVC lighting has come a long way. It's been around for a long time in operating theatres. Now the event sector, you're now able to dry hire this equipment and put it up on your lighting rig, very much the same way as you put emergency lighting. And basically what that does, it kills every known germ in a sort of 24-hour period. It has its certain health issues, but the safety protocols are now in place. One area to consider.
And that could also be used for cleaning overnight and things, couldn't it?
Absolutely. Very much. You can imagine. Think of an operating theatre. That technology, except in the event space.
Yes.
So and it's getting to the point. It's totally affordable. Other things you could probably consider is with thermal monitoring. Although there is mixed thoughts about thermal monitoring, depending on who you talk to. Some government bodies aren't convinced on the effectiveness of it. It's been referred to that it has Q&A issues, quality assurance issues. Having said that, it can restore a lot of confidence with your delegates.
And there's different ways of doing that, because you can have it where you look at an iPad and it's heat screening, isn't it? And then you can have one where someone's got a thermometer and they take your temperature. So I guess that's about thinking about your audience and your environment and what's practical and why you're doing it, really, because I think that's part of it. If it's to build confidence, then that's great. But in terms of other things then, so first aid and things like that, do we need to take any extra measures around that?
Well, once again, our starting point, as it always has been, talk to the venue, see what they've got in place. We shouldn't really need enhanced first aid because the COVID transmission situation isn't something that generally needs an immediate response. However, things to consider is maybe an isolation room. So if you've got your event full throttle, as it were, and a delegate manifests symptoms, and they have no way of leaving site for 4 or 5 hours, you have an isolation room that you can place them in with welfare facilities in there until such times as it's safe and appropriate for them to leave the venue. Those sort of things are worth considering. Or once again, your venue might have already thought about that and might already have a designated area.
Okay. And again, they're all very much practical things that you can communicate as well to build the overall trust and confidence. So that's just a little bit of a brief overview to the 4 key pillars. There's an awful lot more that goes on behind each of those pillars and things that we need to consider. Every event is variable due to the makeup of the audience, the duration. There's so many factors we need to consider. It's about keeping an open mind, and it's about being practical in our approach. So thank you very much, Alan, and thank you, Amy. Really appreciate your thoughts on that, and hopefully that's given us some things to think about. What else do we need to be doing to rethink event design? We've established that people's physical time will hold a stronger value than it does at the moment. So events and experiences need to deliver so much more than they currently do. We have to start off with the event purpose and define the why, because that's what will create the personal connection. The why is really expressing that bigger picture contribution. It's to reconnect everyone to the purpose of what they're there to do, and that's the bigger purpose. So the event or experience needs to reconnect them to that. Once you've got that, shape everything else around it, because that's what people will want to do, and that's what encourages a powerful emotional connection. Once you've done that, that gives us the ability to have people physically there, so they are present and they can interact with others. And there's a common understanding there, so they can understand each other, that they want to be at the event because they want to share their views with like-minded others. And it gives us a deeper understanding, and it also means we can create a shared identity. Well, one of the other things that we should be considering is, what's a common goal of bringing all those people together at a live event? And what we need to do is, once we've established that goal, we can think about getting everyone's collaboration as part of that. Now, that could be through business transformation, or it could be through CSR, or it could just be how we reflect the business purpose and values. All of those things are key to the event design and how we re-engage with our audiences. We need to embrace technology as we return, but we need to make sure it's adding value. People have now gone on a huge journey of using technology, and we need to make sure when we return to the live event space, that it isn't just a gimmick. So we've, got lots of new things that we can utilize, whether that's virtual worlds, and that's a platform that I believe can supplement live experiences. We've got lots of tools to engage users, and that's something that can design and evolve over time. We've got hybrid, which I think is very imminent at the moment. That gives us the ability to target an audience and to really connect and engage with them, and make sure we can harness that human connection whilst expanding our reach to a wider audience. But the thing we have to be careful of is that we're not just going to do the same experience for both, because that's not going to work. We need to make sure that we use the common areas where we want to engage the audience together, so they have a rich experience and then establish where there's crossovers for that, and then design each one separately so that it's tailored for the medium that you're reaching with that audience. Event apps are brilliant, and they're a great way of supporting some of the things we talked about earlier. So supporting the contactless experience, which is ever present these days. And they're also a greater opportunity to engage with content and give people more choice. And of course, extended reality. So the ability to merge the physical and virtual worlds together. We're seeing it more and more, and it's a really brilliant way of bringing content to life through physical environments, and it's really enhancing that viewing experience. One thing we have to consider through all of this is about choice. People want choice, and they want the ability to be able to influence the things that they interact with, the experiences they have, and the content that they consume. So as we design events, we need to be making sure that we're providing choice, we're providing different pathways, and we're providing new rich experiences. And that will connect the audience to the content, because the power to choose gives you greater connection to those experiences and information. Expectations of our audiences have changed. Talked about that wow experience earlier on, and we have a tall order to deliver on all of those things. But I've got every confidence that we've got some amazing tools, and we've got brilliant foundations that we can pull from, and we're experts at this. We now need to embrace the change, move it on. We're all in it together, and we can create some incredible experiences of a new world that will allow our audiences to reconnect with the live experiences that pretty much most of us have been missing out on for certainly the last 6 months. Live events will return. The journey to that is going to be turbulent, I would imagine, but we've got the experience that we can draw on to make them bigger and better than ever before. So thank you for taking the time to watch this tent talk. And if you have any questions, I'll be around at the end of the day to answer those questions for you.